Friendship in ancient Greece. Now you might be asking, why explore friendship in ancient Greece? As a scholar and as a Catholic, I have an abiding interest in friendship. This interest stems, I think, from a paragraph in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, specifically paragraph 357, which reads, "Being in the image of God, the human individual possesses the dignity of a person, who is not just something, but someone. He is capable of self-knowledge, of self-possession, and of freely giving himself and entering into communion with other persons. And he is called by grace to a covenant with his Creator to offer him a response of faith and love that no other creature can give in his stead." This passage expresses what I think is the heart of Christian anthropology, that is, the Christian doctrine of the human person. You will notice the prominent use of the term communion, specifically communion with other persons. Friendship is, in my humble opinion, the highest form this interpersonal communion can take in this life and in eternity. But to understand friendship, we need to look at the history of the term. I therefore feel it appropriate to take a look at friendship as the ancient Greeks understood it, specifically through Plato and Aristotle. Now, before we get to Plato and Aristotle, we need to look at what I call the conventional view of friendship. And this view is expressed by Lysias, an ancient Roman orator who predated Plato. His conventional view of friendship was quite straightforward. It involved goodwill towards those favorably disposed towards us and animosity towards the ill-willed. In other words, being good to people who like you and bad to people who don't like you. That's friendship, according to Lysias. Now we turn to Plato and we'll look at two of his discourses, the Republic and Phaedrus. In the Republic, Plato takes this conventional view of friendship and turns it on its head. This occurs within the context of a discussion on justice. Now, in classical antiquity, both for the Greeks and later for the Romans, justice consisted of giving to each person what was their due. Based upon this, one Polemarchus, a character in the dialogue, argues that what one owes to one's enemies is bad things. In the character of Socrates, Plato challenges this view. He asks Polemarchus to ponder the relationship between friendship and moral goodness. Speaking of friends, do you mean those a person believes to be good and useful to him, or those who are actually good and useful even if he doesn't think they are, and similar with enemies? Asks Socrates. Polemarchus replies that a friend is one whom one believes to be good and useful, and the same with enemies. Socrates then draws attention to the fact that we are often mistaken in this. We often perceive someone to be good, yet in reality they are bad. Likewise, we perceive someone to be bad when in fact they are good. If this is true, Socrates argues, then good people are often our enemies and bad ones our friends. And if this is so, then it's just to benefit bad people and harm good ones. This absurdity leads to the two of them to redefine what a friend is. They say a good person will be a friend and a bad one an enemy. Notice that friendship is now rooted in moral goodness. A good person is a friend simply by virtue of being good. But Socrates goes even further. Given the fact that a good person is a friend simply by virtue of being good, he asks if a truly good man can ever harm anyone, even his enemy. Polemarchus responds that it is right to harm those who are bad and therefore enemies. Socrates then shifts the focus to virtue, arete. Arete is the Greek word that refers to excellence or perfection. The virtue or arete of a horse is to be an excellent horse, of a dog to be an excellent dog. The virtue of a human being, according to Socrates, is to be just, to be morally good. Socrates then gets Polemarchus to acknowledge that things become worse when they are harmed. A horse becomes a bad horse, a dog becomes a bad dog. From this it follows that people who are harmed must become more unjust. From here he reaches the absurd conclusion. He says those who are just can make people unjust through justice, that is, by giving them the bad things they supposedly deserve. On the contrary, argues Socrates, the role of the just person is to make others just. Socrates arrives at the conclusion that a just person must never do harm to anyone, be he friend or enemy. Since a just man is a good man, and it is the function of the good man to make others good, It is clear that it is never just to harm anyone. Thus, Plato, in the person of Socrates, repudiates the view of justice as doing good to one's friends and harm to one's enemies. Justice, on the contrary, does good even to an enemy in the hope of making the unjust person just. For Plato, a la Socrates, both friendship and justice are rooted in moral goodness. Elsewhere, Plato tells us that the good that provides the foundation for friendship is temperance, or self-control. We see this in his dialogue Phaedrus. The dialogue centers on the contention by Phaedrus that the services offered by a non-lover are preferable to those of a lover. The Greek word used here is philos, which can be translated lover or beloved, but is also translated friend. A friend is one who dearly loves another. In what does such love consist? The question is rendered murky by the Athenian institution of paiderastia, a relationship between an older man and a teenage boy through which the younger partner was to learn virtue. Ideally, such a relationship did not involve sexual activity, although it did involve eros, which for the Greeks signified a type of love characterized by longing for a good that one lacks. Erotic love is the desire to possess a good that is perceived to reside in a beloved object, yet calls the lover beyond the beloved to the pure contemplation of the good. For Socrates, this ultimate good was truth itself, pure and unstained by physical desire. And so, eros is ordered to an ultimate end, the contemplation of truth. The mind of the true philosopher, that is, a lover of wisdom, ascends to contemplate divine, eternal truths. Such an ascension involves a recollection of eternal truths that the soul encountered in its pure spiritual state before it became joined to a body. Such a soul is planted in the seed of a man who will become a lover of wisdom or of beauty. Such a man possessing such a soul is one who practices philosophy without guile. His love for the other is ordered to a mutual apprehension of the truth. And thus, if two people are thus committed, then their shared life becomes one of bliss and shared understanding. For Plato, a shared perception of the true good invites the two friends to lifelong relationship characterized by philosophy and virtue. We turn now to Aristotle, and we will consider his understanding of friendship by looking at one of his signature works, the Nicomachean Ethics. The emphasis upon a shared perception of and striving toward the good achieved a fuller and more systematic development in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle discusses friendship, philia, in the context of the virtues, which are the basis of personal and political morality. Virtue, for Aristotle, is a strength of character arising from habit. Such character strengths include prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, that is, the four cardinal virtues, as well as liberality, wittiness, and others. The virtues are the ways in which we cultivate the good in human nature and thus achieve eudaimonia, that is, happiness. Eudaimonia refers not only to a subjective sense of satisfaction, but also carries the idea of flourishing, living well, and doing well. The virtues are the fundamental means to human flourishing. In addition, given the social nature of human beings, the virtues are also how we contribute to the good of the community in which we live. A virtuous person is one who has achieved rational mastery of his passions and appetites and is thus able to contribute to the rational order and stability of the state. For this reason, a good magistrate, argues Aristotle, is one who passes laws conducive to the virtue of the citizens. After an extended discussion of the various virtues, Aristotle begins to discuss the nature of friendship and maintains that friendship is necessary for the enjoyment and security of happiness. Friendship is also the relational means whereby virtue becomes operative and beneficial to the community. How is this the case? Friendship becomes publicly operative through the virtue of beneficence. Beneficence is simply the practice of doing good for others. It is essential to human happiness. A genuinely happy person is one who is able to effect good things for his or her fellow citizens and be publicly praised for so doing. Friends, those upon whom one can bestow good things, make this possible. Thus, friendship is the means whereby one is able to share one's material prosperity and receive public praise thereby. If friendship promotes interpersonal concord, then the question arises as to the character requirements of friendship. Aristotle asks, does friendship arise among all sorts of people, or can people not be friends if they are vicious? That is, given to vice. Friendship necessarily involves mutual reciprocated goodwill. What sorts of persons can genuinely share in this give and take of goodwill? To answer this question, Aristotle discusses three types of friendship corresponding to three types of love: love of utility, love of pleasure, and love of the good for its own sake. Friendship of utility is a relationship in which each person seeks some end beyond the relationship itself, for example, social advancement, wealth, or power. This type of friendship, of course, does not last, for when the cause of their being friends is removed, the friendship is itself dissolved. Friendship of pleasure is likewise an unstable type of friendship. In such a relationship, the friends pursue recreations that are mutually satisfying. This type of friendship, according to Aristotle, is prevalent among the young, quote, who are guided by their feelings, end quote, and pursue whatever is ready at hand. Like friendship of utility, friendship of pleasure is quickly dissolved. Both in friendship of utility and of pleasure, friendship is coincidental to the goal of the relationship. For this reason, the friendship lasts only as long as what is sought after lasts. Finally, there is friendship based upon love of the good for its own sake. This may be called friendship of virtue. This is the truest type of friendship, the friendship of good people similar in virtue, and has as its goal the acquisition of moral goodness. Each person wishes good to the other not for the sake of pleasure or utility, but simply for the sake of the other. This type of friendship is truly lasting because virtue itself is lasting. Friendship of virtue among those who have cultivated habitual dispositions towards moral excellence is friendship in its essence, according to Aristotle. It arises spontaneously from those who have acquired virtue. Because of this, in loving the other, one actually loves what is good for oneself. Aristotle says, for when a good person becomes a friend, he becomes a good for his friend. Thus there emerges a natural reciprocity between friends accompanied by a genuine equality. Aristotle says, each of them loves what is good for himself and repays in equal measure the wish and the pleasantness of his friend, for friendship is said to be equality. At the same time, this reciprocal love is rooted in self-love, which is seen in the internal concord of the soul with itself. According to Aristotle, the excellent person is of one mind with himself and desires the same things in his whole soul. The internal concord of the soul with its own self renders the person capable of concord with others outside the self, and becomes externalized in friendship. The vicious person, on the other hand, is incapable of the self-love that is necessary for true friendship. Vicious people, writes Aristotle, are at odds with themselves and, like incontinent people, have an appetite for one thing and a wish for another. A vicious person is alienated from himself, the various levels of the soul being at odds with each other. For this reason, a vicious person cannot stand to be alone with himself, and thereby is incapable of true friendship. Thus, for Aristotle, true friendship can only exist among the virtuous, for only a virtuous person truly loves himself and is thus able to extend this love to another self, who is one who is likewise virtuous. Yet even this involves a certain amount of pleasure. Based on the principle that nature appears to avoid above all what is painful and to aim at what is pleasant, even friendship based upon virtue necessarily involves pleasure, that is, pleasure in one another's company. Aristotle says that people cannot spend their time with each other if they are not pleasant and do not enjoy the same things, as they seem to in the friendship of companions. He continues, it is the friendship of good people that is friendship most of all, as we have often said. For what is lovable and choice-worthy seems to be what is unconditionally good or pleasant, and what is lovable and choice-worthy for each person seems to be what is good and pleasant for him. And both of these make one good person lovable and choice-worthy for another good person. In other words, virtuous people both recognize the inherent lovability and choice-worthiness of each other and, by virtue of the fact that they themselves are good, find the companionship of each other pleasant and good for themselves. Thus it is that pleasure, like justice, is subordinate to friendship when such friendship is grounded in virtue.